Hello and welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH Podcast, where we go beyond the headlines into the news that matters to you in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara. I'm your host, Louie Butko, and today we are going to turn our focus on crime and the courts here in Hamilton. And to do that, I am pleased to be joined by Hamilton Spectator columnist and investigative reporter Susan Clairmont. Clairmont first joined the Spec newsroom in 1997 and focuses in crime, court, and social justice. In her time, she has covered some of Hamilton's highest-profile murder cases. She's been named Canada's top columnist by the National Newspaper Awards, has been Columnist of the Year 5 times at the Ontario Newspaper Awards, and won this year's Enterprise Reporting Award for her feature series, Getting Rich, which took a deep dive into the murder trial of Richard Taylor, who was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder of his mother and stepfather. She was also a runner-up for a National Newspaper Award this past year for her feature on the suicide of 12-year-old Grace McSweeney of Brantford after years of bullying. And Susan, obviously you deal with some really heavy subjects in your time covering news. What is it about this past 25 years that the crime beat still is your passion?
Yeah, it's a good question because a lot of new reporters start out on that beat, as you probably know, and quickly want off it. But I've been there a long time. I think because I can't imagine anything more dramatic, anything more important than literally life and death situations. And, the laws around the crimes that I cover are always evolving, and I find that endlessly fascinating. And I learn from, the police and the lawyers, and most of all, the families and victims that I work with. So I'm constantly learning new things.
Yeah, that's we were just talking about this. I started in sports, and I always said, sports is never life and death, right? Sports is very rarely life and death, I should say. And then news, There is something about news that, as difficult as it is to sit across from the victim of the family of a murder victim and having that conversation and getting to tell their stories. And I noticed you said learning from police, learning from lawyers, but learning from the people you speak to does take a human touch. It is very difficult some days, but what is it about that you have found success in clearly, but that you thrive in?
It's just so rewarding. I mean, I've never been particularly interested in interviewing rich and famous people who have, microphones in their face all the time. I would rather talk to people who have never had the experience of dealing with the media, and in particular, being a voice or being a platform for victims of crime. In our justice system, they don't have very many opportunities to speak. In a trial, they sit in the body of the court and rarely have a chance to say anything during a court procedure. So through my stories, I can give them an opportunity to have their say and to speak their mind. And as a columnist, I have the real privilege of being able to advocate when I'm writing. So victims' rights is something that I care deeply about.
Yeah, and it shows in your writing, in your column pieces. I want to start with one of your bylines this week. This was sort of along the lines of something you've been very well versed in. It was your Spectator investigation last year called Breach of Trust. Mohammed Hook was also known as Amir Hook. There's no warrant out for his arrest. What's the latest on this? Give us a quick background for our listeners.
Yeah, so this is an ongoing investigation that I've been at for quite a while. It involves some shady lawyers in Hamilton, one of whom has been disbarred. The other one is currently suspended. And they had a scheme going, allegedly, where they were inviting clients to give them huge amounts of money, millions of dollars in some cases, to then pass on to a third-party borrower. And the scam kind of worked like this. You give me $1 million, I keep it for 24 hours, and you get $1 million back plus another 100,000 or 150,000. And lo and behold, people gave their money but didn't get it back. And so the latest story is about this guy named Amir Hook, who the money has been allegedly going to. And through my investigation, I've learned that there's now an arrest warrant out for him by Toronto police, but doesn't look like he will be arrested anytime soon. He seems to have fled the country.
Now, a lot of these investigations, you're ahead of the police sometimes, it feels, right?
In this one, I have been, and that's been part of the story, in fact, is that some of the victims of this scheme who have lost all kinds of money tried going to police repeatedly, to Hamilton Police, to the RCMP, and felt that their money had been stolen, wanted it investigated, were told no. Hamilton Police said they weren't going to investigate. And it wasn't until after I started reporting on it and digging in and asking questions and asking the police why they hadn't investigated that suddenly an investigation was launched.
And the latest, it seems like there's an arrest warrant from Toronto Police, but Hamilton Police is still...
Hamilton Police is investigating, it says, but won't say anything beyond that.
All right, that's the update. That was the byline in the paper this week. I wanted to get that out of the way. It was fresh. I wanted to make sure. But
hot off the press.
Hot off the press. Yeah, absolutely. I picked up the Spectator. I'm like, great. Susan's in this week. I can ask her about this one right off the top. But you've mentioned, we talked about this. You've been covering crime, the courts for 25 years. What's something that you've noticed has changed either slowly or dramatically? Is there something in the last 2 decades that really jumps out to you?
Ooh, lots of things, but I would say the most immediate thing is the effects of the pandemic on the court system. Anybody who's ever spent a day in a courtroom knows that it is the most archaic system you can imagine. Literally, and I've written about this before, literally, a cart is wheeled in to the courtroom full of paper files that are falling all over the place. And that's been how we keep track of everybody in our justice system. These old-fashioned file folders. And but when lockdown happened, the justice system had to keep rolling, and miraculously, within weeks, they found a way to digitize things and get up and running on Zoom and get with the times and bring technology into the courtroom. And some of that has stuck and has continued since the pandemic. And I'm grateful for that. Some of it is still in flux. And we now have, I've been in courtrooms recently where judges are debating whether cases should be heard on Zoom or not, or whether we should go back to you just have to walk into the courtroom and be here if you want to partake. So it's been really interesting to see that unfold.
Yeah, I got the piece here. You write, first, access to court isn't as easy as it should be in a system that by law must be open to the public. Is that, as somebody who's been covering this, is that something that you find is just a lack of resources at this time? Is it intentional? Like, why do you find that it is this kind of case that it's hard to do your job as a court reporter?
It is hard. I'm someone who spends a lot of time at the courthouse and has for decades. And, you will still find me literally running around the halls of the courthouse trying to find the courtroom where my case is happening. Lawyers have to run around looking for their own cases. I mean, it's just crazy. So it's partly that archaic system. It's partly a lack of commitment from some justice system participants, as they're often called, in being open and transparent. There are still, people who work in the justice system who really don't care whether the media has access or whether members of the public have access. And then there are those who purposely make it difficult. And, it happens from time to time where I'm covering a high-profile case, and a defense lawyer doesn't really want me to be in a courtroom, doesn't want me to see what's happening, and things are done to make it more difficult for me to even know what's going on in the courtroom.
Talking about some changes, what's something that's constant? What's one thing that you've been doing this for as long as you have? What's one thing that'll never change? Oh, the excitement when a verdict comes in. I've been at the Spec for more than 25 years, and I've been a reporter for more than 30 years. And when I cover a big murder trial, and I'm there every day for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, and particularly when it's a jury trial, and then the jury goes out to start its deliberations, and there's the waiting and the waiting. And then that message comes through that there's a verdict, and we all rush to the courtroom. I still get nervous. I still get excited by that. Within a 5-minute span, I have about 100 things to do. I've got to try and absorb everything that's going on. I've got to tweet out the verdict. I've got a whole story to write. I've got interviews to do. And I never know. People always want to know, so what's the verdict going to be? And when is the verdict going to come in? I have no clue. I wish time you would save if you knew when the verdict was coming.
If I had that magic, talent, that would be amazing. But the verdict is just so huge and so important, and so much rides on it every time.
I wanted to get to this question. Wanted to start with it, but I got a little sidetracked, which is what I do here. Is Hamilton a safe city?
A lot has changed since I arrived in Hamilton, and I think there are real problems with our downtown core right now. And it's for a lot of very complex reasons. It's about very much about the opioid crisis and mental health issues and homelessness and the intersection of all those things. It makes it a challenge, I think. And I think anybody who disagrees with that isn't being completely honest. But you can also look at other indicators, and the reality is our homicide rates in Hamilton have been pretty steady over decades, averaging about 10 a year. We certainly have some years where that spikes or where it drops, but the average remains fairly consistent. But I think what we're seeing in the downtown core is reflected in every community right now, in every community across Canada, across the U.S. The opioid crisis has just decimated communities, and it's an incredibly complex problem mixed in with housing prices and all the other things that are literally on our front page every single day.
Yeah, and so obviously I'm not going to ask specifics. You still write at the Spectator, but we've talked about this newsroom was bustling, right? I mean, 20 years ago, there's 100 people going 100 miles an hour. We've noticed the condension of newspapers here in Hamilton. It's something that's felt across the country, across the world. How can we be better informed citizens when newsroom resources are as strapped as they are these days?
Right. Well, I mean, the reason newsroom resources are where they are is because two things. One is people not wanting to pay for the news, right? Yeah. That you don't get Netflix for free. and you don't get the Hamilton Spectator for free.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that. I can't do the kind of work that I do, the investigative reporting that I do, the court coverage I do, the work that all of my colleagues do, unless we are paid for it, and our team and all our resources are paid for. I mean, it's kind of simple. There's also the issue with Facebook and advertising. Most of the advertising dollars that used to go to places like the Hamilton Spectator and other newspapers across the country, that money is all going to online, to Facebook. And
$5 to put a marketplace ad where you can get an instant reply, like classified. I mean, we've had this discussion on this show already. We're not a very old show, but we've talked about the demise of classifieds and what that means for the local paper. We're talking here resources, and it is, as soon as you mention, we have to pay for good journalism, right? That's it. A lot of people. I'm not reading this article. It's behind a paywall. I'm not subscribing. I'm not going to pay 99 cents a week, which is a great deal for,
right.
I think for new subscribers, just giving a plug there. That's how I get my paper. I admit I don't get a physical paper, but I have a Spectator login. I'm a Niagara guy, so I got my St. Catharines Standard login. What is it about that idea for you as a journalist? And I'm sure people have told you, I'm not reading that. It's behind a paywall. Like, why isn't this free? What's your response to that?
Just exactly what I've said. I have to make a living. I don't work for free. And, the investigations that I do, like the one we were talking about with Mr. Hook, months and months and months of my time spent on an investigation like that. It's, we deliver news that nobody else can. What we do is often different from what CHCH does or what any of the other media in the city do. I mean, we all have different roles to play. And, it's so important for there to be multiple news sources. I mean, if people really want to know what's going on in this community, if they want to have diverse opinions, if they want to, really tap into the heartbeat of Hamilton, then they shouldn't be reading just the Spectator. They should be looking at the work that all of us are doing.
Does that worry you, though, that there's not enough resources, that people are only getting one opinion that might be a Hamilton release website posting or something like that, or they're only getting whatever's being kind of fed to them for free wherever they get their resources? I mean, does that worry you as a journalist?
100%. I mean, there's been study after study after study done that people tend to navigate or gravitate to news sites or any kind of information site that reinforces opinions that they already have, right? So, I mean, it's a huge problem in politics. It's a huge problem in science reporting. You should be reading stuff that you don't agree with. I'm a columnist. I hear all the time people say, "Oh, I read you all the time, but I don't always agree with you." Fabulous. Perfect. I want to challenge people. I want to make people think. I want them to see it from a different point of view. And if you are only going to one blog or one website or one newspaper every day, and that's the source of all of your information, then you have a narrow focus. And within the Spectator, we have lots of different and dissenting views. I always laugh when people think that everybody who works at the Hamilton Spectator, votes for the same politicians and has the same beliefs and the same, the same ideas. And I mean, it couldn't Honestly, if you spend any time with us and heard us arguing with each other, it couldn't be farther from the truth. And that's a good thing. And when you read the Spec, you've got letters to the editors and columns from community writers. And so you are getting different perspectives.
How do you get young people more interested in the news, more involved, and in turn better informed? Because what scares me as a 31-year-old dude living in the city is how many times I will bring something up to my friends around a bar or something, and they have no idea about what's going on. They're used to news being free. They're used to it just being on their phone or free websites. How do we get young people more involved in the news?
I think they need to understand how news is created. Because if you ask, a 25-year-old where they get their news, they're very likely to say TikTok.
Yeah.
And when you ask where on TikTok, it's like, well, there's
my
some
finger goes up and then
I see the next one. There's some guy who's talking about this murder trial. Well, I can tell you that guy has never stepped foot inside that courtroom during the murder trial, and I know that because I'm the only person there. And that guy is reading my column on TikTok. Yeah. And if you don't buy the Spectator, and there is no more Spectator, then I won't be in the courtroom to cover that trial. And that guy on TikTok, he won't have anything to read anymore. So it's understanding that the tweets, the TikToks, the Instagram posts, they're starting with people like me who are actually doing the work. We're the ones reading the documents and going out and doing the interviews and going to the crime scene and sitting in the courtroom and going to the city hall meeting, and that becomes the fodder for social media. But you won't have any of it. You won't know anything if you don't have the real journalists doing the real work. And
I mean, it is scary. I've been at council where I've looked around and it's me and somebody else just thinking like, well, I was here because I was assigned here today. There just happened to be a story. This was the biggest story we could follow, but the Washington Post line, democracy dies in darkness, right? I mean, it's so true that if they were able to get away, like anybody, if there was a counselor who wanted to be corrupt, you'd go to a city where there's no local newspaper, because that's what news does. It informs citizens of what's happening. And that's why, I think I've asked that question to almost all my guests, is just how do we become more informed citizens in a time like this? Because it's a little scary how uninformed, or more dangerously, misinformed people are these days.
Yes to all of that. You hear people say, well, if it's important enough, somebody will tell me, right? And but who is telling you, and what are they telling you, and is it accurate? Is it fact-based? Facts still matter, and accountability matters, and transparency matters, and that's what journalism does, is it brings all of that to light.
It's the referee, right? It's being able to look at multiple sides to a story. I mean, not every story has two sides, by the way, right? There's some things out there that this is fact, this is not. But I would say that every story has at least two sides. At least two.
There's no stories with one side. There's stories.
There's questions to be asked, no matter what.
Many sides.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of what's scary to me, is that a lot of people are taking what people say verbatim, when there really does sometimes, a lot of times, need to be that filtration to put things in context, to question, not just an announcement, but having questions. And I guess, I think with the downsizing of newsrooms and reporters, and it is, again, I use the word scary, but there is something there that people are going to try and get away with things. And, off topic for our crime beat here, but not off topic for our crime beat, because people are going to try and get away with things.
No. I mean, if nobody is sitting in the courtrooms, and I'll go back to that because that's what I do. If there are no reporters in courtrooms, then how do we know that justice is being done, right? I mean, the saying, the philosophy behind the justice system is that it's not good enough for justice just to be done. It has to be seen to be done. We have to know that it's working. We have to know what's right and what's wrong and what needs to be fixed. And when the system has failed and fallen apart. And the average person doesn't have time to go and sit for 8 hours in a courtroom every day for 6 weeks while murder trial's happening. That's my job, to do that. And to be critical and to be a critical thinker and to bring some expertise to it and some history and some experience, so that we know that the community that we're living in and the society that we're living in is functioning. And we need to know who the bad guys are. We need to know who the good guys are. We need to ask questions and make people stop and think.
You brought up the good guys. You brought up the bad guys. Sometimes they are one and the same. And that brings me to this one here. Last month, Hamilton Police Constable Alfonso Esquivel resigned from the force rather than face disciplinary charges after he admitted to a police investigator to regularly ordering cocaine while on duty. And then earlier this month, Constable Michael Lacombe was found guilty of sexually assaulting a fellow officer, a woman he had known since she was 12 years old, and he was a 31-year-old male. He pled guilty. The one thing about this, and this is kind of goes cops behaving badly, to your point. The one thing I never understood working in news was the one line, suspended with pay. That is a lot of police officers. You're charged with a crime, you are suspended with pay until sentencing? Factually, until conviction, for sure. But
until they are fired.
Is that something, like, that rubs me the wrong way? As somebody who has interactions with police, good end, I've gotten a ticket before too, right? But these are the people we're supposed to trust the most, and this kind of rubs me the wrong way. What
was your ticket for?
Just speeding, 10 over.
Okay. Had to ask.
I just renewed my insurance, so thank you for the reminder, Susan. I appreciate that.
So, yeah, suspended with pay. It does irk a lot of people, and mostly police chiefs. So Ontario is the only province in Canada where it is the law that police officers have to be suspended with pay. There is no other option for police chiefs. And every time I write a story like that, people, our readers are often angry at the chiefs. The chiefs don't want this. The chiefs have lobbied for decades to have that legislation changed. The police unions are on the other side of that. And in a nutshell, they say innocent until proven guilty. So why would you suspend without pay? So it's an ongoing issue, and it costs taxpayers millions of dollars every year across the province to pay police officers who are sometimes suspended for years at a time, and they are very adept at stretching that out for as long as possible. And I can't tell you how many times I've written about police officers who have been suspended with pay for 1, 2, 3, 7 years at a time, and literally the night before their Police Act hearing is to begin, they resign. So they wait until the very last minute. So yes, it's a problem, and costs us lots of money. At the same time, when police services are saying they need more money for frontline officers, among other things, but definitely for frontline officers. So anybody who thinks that chiefs are okay with that haven't really thought it through. They want that money to go to people who are working, who are able to come to work every day and do their job, not the officers who are sitting at home.
And I mean, and you put it's the resources into the police tribunal investigations that happen. And then as soon as they quit, it's like, well, he's not a police officer anymore, or she's not a police officer anymore. There's no investigation.
That's right. That's the end of the process.
That's it.
Right,
it ends right there. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Susan, you and I could probably talk for hours and hours, which means you're going to have to come back on the show.
I'd love to.
Okay, I got it on tape. We were rolling. Susan Clairmont, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Susan Clairmont is a columnist and an investigative journalist for the Hamilton Spectator. My thanks to her for joining me today, and my thanks to you as well, because without you, we wouldn't have a show. Make sure to like and subscribe CHCH Podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can also find the QR code, chch.com/podcast. Once again, my thanks to you for joining me. Oh, there it is on the screen if you're watching it. But again, chch.com/podcast for more. Thanks so much from all of us here at CHCH. I'm Louie Butko. Hoping you have a great day.